Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes it feels like talking to your parents about your problems is like hitting a brick wall, especially when you are a teenager and things are already complicated? Well, a really interesting study dives into exactly this question, looking at why teenage girls in India might find it easier to open up to strangers than to their own moms and dads. It's a fascinating look at family dynamics, culture, and how we connect with others when we're struggling. So, what's going on here? Researchers talked to 20 girls aged 13 to 21 who had been going through a tough time mentally. They found that a big reason these girls hesitated to talk to their parents was a kind of emotional silence at home. It seemed like talking about mental health was often discouraged or just brushed aside. Things like strict cultural rules, being afraid of being judged, not being able to talk easily with parents, and not really knowing much about mental health resources all added to the problem. Basically, when you don't feel safe to share your feelings at home, you naturally look for support somewhere else, maybe friends, online groups, or even people you don't know. Let's dig a bit deeper into why this is such a big deal. The world, and especially young people, are facing a mental health crisis. Surveys show that a huge number of young people are feeling distressed or struggling, and the situation in India is also quite serious, with millions of kids dealing with mental health issues. What's really telling is that only about 40% of young people in India feel it's okay to ask for professional help. That points to a lot of stigma and not enough awareness. Adolescence itself is a roller coaster. Your brain and emotions are changing super fast. And this is happening within a world that often has strict cultural expectations and family rules. For girls in India, there can be extra pressures like worrying about how they look and fitting into certain social roles. This can make them more prone to anxiety and feeling down. You'd think parents would be the go-to support system, right? But the study points out that many Indian parents might not know enough about mental health, or might have negative views about psychological struggles. They might lack mental health smarts, and this, along with stigma, can make it hard for teens to open up. Imagine parents not understanding conditions like anxiety. It's no wonder kids freeze up. One number that really stands out is that only about 10% of adults in India have good mental health literacy. That is a massive gap. On the flip side, Indian teens are super connected. Smartphones and social media are everywhere. A big majority of teenagers know how to use smartphones and spend a lot of time on social media. This online world becomes a place to cope and connect. But it's not without its problems. India actually has the highest rate of cyberbullying in the world. So, while teens need a safe space to express themselves, family communication styles aren't always providing that. Now, you might be thinking, haven't we studied this before? The researchers say that while we know a lot about anxiety, stigma, or how parents talk to teens, the real gap when it comes to understanding why girls in cultures like India's might prefer talking to strangers. Much of the research out there is based on Western cultures. So this study aims to fill that specific gap in understanding the Indian family context. So how did they find all this out? The researchers used the qualitative approach, which basically means they had deep, open-ended conversations with 20 teenage girls. They wanted to really get into the girls' experiences and how they felt about talking to their families. They found these girls by putting out an invitation in online writing and social media groups where the researcher was already active. This helped them reach a varied group of girls from different parts of India, including big cities, smaller towns, and rural areas, so they could get a good mix of family environments. The interviews were conducted privately through text messages, which is a really smart move. It helps protect privacy and lowers the pressure when talking about sensitive stuff. They asked all sorts of questions, like what mental health means to them, and to describe a time they wanted to talk to their parents about their feelings. They even asked a direct question: if you had to choose between talking to a parent or a stranger, who would it be and why? Now, a quick note on the ethics. Because the questions weren't clinical and it was online and anonymous, it was considered low risk. No personal information was collected, and participants could skip anything or leave the study anytime. For those under 18, parental consent wasn't practical because of the anonymity. So the teens themselves gave their agreement. After all the interviews, the researchers carefully read through everything and looked for repeating ideas or patterns. This is called thematic analysis, and it's like piecing together a puzzle to understand the main messages. They quoted the participants directly to show what they meant. Let's get to the juicy stuff, the findings. The number one thing that came up was anxiety. It was way more common than other feelings like sadness. The girls described feeling anxious about school, about talking to people, and the big one, being afraid of being judged. They often felt like they were constantly being watched or were too self-aware of themselves, whether in class or online. Family relationships groups were a huge piece of the puzzle. So many of the girls held back from talking to their parents because they'd been judged, ignored, or compared to others before. They'd braced themselves for criticism before they even tried to share. One girl put it perfectly, saying her mom would just lecture me or not understand. This fear of how parents would react made them shut down emotionally. There seemed to be a big gap in how teens and parents understood mental health. Parents often downplayed emotional struggles, seeing anxiety as an overreaction. This generational and cultural gap made the girls feel invalidated and less likely to even try to start a conversation at home. Since home wasn't always a safe place for their emotions, they turned to others. Peers, online groups, and even strangers felt more understanding, accepting, and less judgmental. These outside connections provided a space for them to be open and get validation without worrying about getting in trouble. Looking at this figure, it visually shows where these girls are turning for help. We see a significant preference for seeking support outside the immediate family. And it wasn't just about talking to others. The girls had their own ways of coping. They journal, draw, exercise, meditate, or use digital tools. Many admitted to censoring themselves around family and using these private methods to deal with stress. It's like they had to manage their feelings all by themselves because the family space wasn't equipped for it. So, to sum up the main patterns, anxiety, especially about how others see them, the fear of being judged, and just a lack of understanding about emotions in the family were the big drivers. These issues made it really hard for them to talk to their parents, pushing them towards outside support. Now, let's tie this back to what other research has found. The literature review in the paper confirms that Indian adolescents are facing a serious mental health crisis. Services are under-resourced, leading to a big gap in treatment. Studies show high rates of depression, anxiety, and other issues. It's also clear that being a girl matters. Girls are more likely to experience what are called internalizing mental health problems, which means they tend to keep their troubles inside. This is often due to how society expects girls to express emotions versus boys. As we saw in the study, how parents parent and communicate is super important. Studies have linked certain parenting styles, like being too strict or too laid back, to higher stress and anxiety in teens. Even parents themselves sometimes admit they don't feel equipped to help their kids through tough times, especially with all the changes happening during and after the pandemic. This is where the other part of the literature comes in. Because talking at home is so difficult, teens are looking for support elsewhere. The paper mentions how studies on mental health chatbots show that young people like using digital spaces that offer anonymity and privacy. It's a signal that they need safe, neutral places to express themselves. Okay, so what does this all mean? The discussion section of the study really lays it out. The girls aren't necessarily trying to hide things. They've learned that sharing might lead to judgment, correction, or misunderstanding. It's a learned pattern based on past experiences. This idea of anticipatory judgment is key. They expect criticism before they even say anything, so they learn to avoid those difficult conversations at home. It's not about individual withdrawal, but a smart way to protect themselves when family interactions don't feel safe. The generational and cultural differences are also a huge factor. Teens often feel their parents don't really grasp modern pressures like academic stress or the online world and its language around mental health. In cultures that value reputation and authority, emotional distress can be seen as disobedience, making open talks even harder. Compared to home, these external connections offer something really valuable: emotional neutrality, support without judgment, no expectations, and no consequences. This shows that teens are actively seeking spaces where they can be their true selves without fear. And it means that if they can't get that support at home, they'll find it somewhere else, even if those places aren't always the best. The way they cope internally, like journaling or art, often acts as a substitute for open communication at home. While these are good in themselves, they can also be a sign that the relational foundation for emotional regulation at home is weak. The big takeaway here is that it's not about who you're related to or who's in charge, but about feeling emotionally safe. If you feel understood, validated, and heard, you're more likely to open up. The study suggests that helping parents become more aware of mental health, teaching communication skills in schools, and encouraging open conversations can really bridge this gap. In conclusion, this study really hammers home that teenage girls' silence on mental health isn't a personal failing, but a response to family dynamics, cultural norms, and generational communication issues. Anxiety, fear of judgment, and feeling invalidated are major hurdles to opening up at home, pushing them towards friends, online groups, or even strangers. There is a disconnect between what teens need emotional safety and what many households provide, especially in more traditional or conservative settings. Boosting parent-teen communication, educating caregivers, and normalizing emotional expression are crucial steps. It's all about emotional safety being the #1 predictor of where teens will find someone to talk to. Now, no study is perfect, and it's important to acknowledge the limitations. One big one is how they found the participants, through online calls. This means they might have attracted girls who are already comfortable talking about their feelings online, so it might not represent everyone. Also, the interviews were done entirely by text. While this helped with privacy, it meant they missed out on things like tone of voice or pauses, which can add a lot of meaning. Everything the girls talked about was from their own point of view, which is what you expect in this kind of study, but it can be independently measured. The number of participants was small, and they weren't representative of all Indian teenage girls. Even though they came from different areas, the findings can be generalized to every single teen girl out there. And as mentioned, parental consent wasn't collected. This was a tough call, but they felt it was necessary to get honest answers from girls who might not feel comfortable discussing these issues with their parents. While ethically sound for this type of study, it does limit how broadly we can generalize the findings. Looking ahead, more research is needed. They suggest using bigger and more diverse groups of participants to see if these patterns hold true elsewhere. It would also be great to hear from parents too, to get a full picture of how family dynamics really work. These kinds of studies can help create better, more sensitive mental health programs for families. And that's it for this dive into why some teenage girls might prefer talking to strangers over their parents when it comes to their mental health. It's a complex issue tied to culture, family, and the need for safe spaces to express ourselves. What are your thoughts on this? Have you ever felt this way? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more awesome breakdowns of science and psychology. See you next time.